So we had a look over the last few years at all of the new GDP guidelines, what was coming in. Fortunately, we had the draft text 7th of November, the actual text. So we looked through everything that we had in place, all of our procedures, we looked through all of our SOPs, all of the training that we were doing with the employees that we have to make sure that at the point at which they came in, at the point at which they were completely implemented, we were 100% ready to go with them. Certainly the temperatures that we're being asked to send at, which used to be the only temperature sensitive material that people really used to send, was either things like PK samples at -80 and some supply drugs that went at 2 to 8. Now we're seeing a whole range of temperatures. So a lot of stuff is still moving at 2 to 8, but as well as that, there's a lot of material that moves at controlled room temperature between 15 and 25. There's a lot of material going out at -80, but also a lot of material now doing temperatures we never used to hear of, like +37 for blood products, for bone marrow, that kind of material. So the challenges that we have that are coming up, the challenges that we're experiencing every day now, taking temperature control materials in, definitely revolves around the use of emerging markets, which obviously have become the areas where people are primarily shipping to. The Western Europe, North America markets are pretty saturated, and so people are trying to use different countries and going out into different places. So a lot of the Middle East, going down into Africa, some of the more challenging countries into Asia. Places like India and China are now fairly routine to go into, but when people are using countries like Myanmar, they're going into places like Laos, into Cambodia, then the infrastructure is not always there in order for people to actually have their goods maintained at temperature along the way. And so we've been doing a lot so that we work with the airlines. We've got a very big database of what's available at each airport, so that if we're sending material in, we know what temperature it's going to be stored at when it gets there. So we've moved to using a lot of phase change materials, so that when we've got a box that's going in, the whole box can be put directly into the refrigerator when it gets there, and can be stored for potentially a month while it clears through customs. Because in some places, like going into South America, routinely it will be a month while we have to wait for things to be released. So there's some big challenges for people in doing clinical trial supply. The first one is that because of the value of drug supply that's being done now, far more complex molecules, far more intense material with very strict temperature requirements, the value of a lot of shipments has gone up exponentially from where it used to be. When people were doing small molecules, if you lost a shipment, it wasn't the end of the world. Now when you're looking at sending drug supplies and an individual vial can be thousands of dollars, you don't want to have huge amounts of supply sitting doing nothing in a warehouse. You want to manufacture pretty much the amount that you're going to need with a small amount of overage, because there are always going to be some problems where you have an issue at the site, where a piece of equipment breaks down, something like that. And so what you end up having is a lot of companies who are working on the bare edges of margin. So it can be a problem if you have something which does go wrong, so that you have a temperature excursion and you lose, particularly if you're doing a bulk shipment and you lose a lot of drug, then trying to make sure that that gets put back in place so that you have no interruption of supply can be a significant challenge for companies. The hot topics here at the conference that we're at is definitely the EU GDP directives. Everybody's talking about it. It's really up at the front of people's minds to be sure that they've understood the regulations completely, that they have all the individual nuances of it, particularly since they don't really address clinical trial material in the same way that they do commercial product. It's very clear about how people are shipping commercial product, but clinical trials already had a very good regulatory system supporting it and a lot of requirements in place, so that it's sure that you could provide temperature data to the regulators is pretty much de rigueur for people. Whereas now the EU new GDP gives us far more with just a single sentence within the directive to tell us that this will apply still to clinical trial drugs as well. So I think over the next 18 months or so, what we're going to see is people expanding out, using the Middle East a lot, which is one of the serious growth markets, using North Africa, going into sub-Saharan Africa, and going into some of the more difficult and challenging locations inside both Asia and Latin America. Also, because of the preponderance that people have now for using large molecules, temperature bands are going to get tighter and tighter as things go on, and there's going to be far more requirement for us to prove temperature, not just for refrigerated materials, but also for controlled ambient, also for elevated temperature shipments. And it would be lovely, and it's what we're aiming for, and they're starting to come through now, is to be able to do tracking and temperature for shipments, even if they're being transported by air. Also, the regulations are changing so that if you're going into somewhere like Saudi Arabia, they want to take a temperature monitor out at the point at which it arrives into Saudi Arabia, so that they can see that the drug has actually been held at the correct temperature before they're prepared to release it from customs. And we think a lot more countries are going to start applying this as well. So people need to be really clear about what's going to happen, and be really clear that they've got 2 temperature monitors in the box, for example, so that one of them can be taken out by the regulators, and they will still have data when their shipment gets all the way to the site. I think it's really important to come to an event like this in order to be able to talk to other people, to see what their experiences are, to see what problems they're having, just to have a really good network with people. Because if you sit in isolation in your office, then you only experience the problems that you have. You only experience the highs and the lows that you have. Whereas coming to something like this and talking to other people means you get to understand what everybody's experiencing. Also to see the commonality of what people are experiencing, so that you can target then what are the issues and where should we be putting resources and investment and training into our employees, so that we can be clear that we're going to sort of deliver the best service that we can to clients. I think we've met a lot of very interesting people here. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people so far. Doing a presentation this morning where I was able to give some details and information about how the supply chain works, looking at different modes of transport, has sparked quite a lot of interest from companies and people coming to talk to me who'd never considered, for example, whether they could be using sea transport in order to move things about. So it gives us a chance to get to talk to people, and we're all looking forward to the fun fair later on.